You guys know I am all about a good historical parallel. And this time we've got a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten a ton of material about the start of Trump's second term as president,
Wow.
which, as you know, has only happened once before in U.S. history.
Right, with Grover Cleveland.
Exactly, way back in the 1800s. So, like, what does that even tell us about where we are now?
I mean, it's fascinating, right? Not just the second term thing,
Yeah.
but the sheer volume of activity right out of the gate. I mean,
Well,
executive orders, just like so many of them.
yeah.
It's record pace.
I was going to say, like, new government department.
Well, yeah, with an interesting name, let's say.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. Lots of questions about what Trump's priorities are. I mean, I get it, right? Presidents want to make an impact right away.
Of course.
But this feels different, right?
Yeah.
It feels like he's trying to remake the government in the first 100 days.
There's definitely like a shock and awe kind of element to it.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of these executive orders seem to align with that conservative think tank Project 2025.
Oh, right.
They released a blueprint for a second Trump term. So it's not even just speed, but a specific vision, you know.
So it's pre-planned. This is all
Things like it.
part of the plan.
Yeah.
Okay. But before we get into all of that, I think we need to kind of set the stage here a little bit. Can you give us a quick recap of Trump's first term and all the controversies surrounding the 2020 election?
Yeah.
You know, just so we all remember where we're coming from here.
Okay. Absolutely. So Trump's first term was, let's just say, a unique approach to governing. We had trade wars, immigration battles, a whole lot of deregulation, and then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic response. You know, it was all handled in a way that challenged norms, let's say. And then the 2020 election itself was incredibly contentious. I mean, with Trump refusing to concede, promoting these claims about widespread voter fraud.
Right. And we can't forget about the whole fake elector scheme and then the January 6th attack on the Capitol, right? Those events really shook people's faith in the democratic process.
For sure, yeah. Those events cast such a long shadow over the transition of power, and it continues to shape the political landscape even today.
Yeah.
You know, it's also worth noting that even with all of that going on, Biden left office with a pretty strong economy.
Right.
Low unemployment, decent job growth. So that's where Trump's starting.
Right.
So he's not rebuilding from scratch here.
Right, which makes this flurry of activity even more interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's not like there's some major crisis happening that demands immediate action, you know?
Right.
So let's get into it. What are some of the biggest executive orders he's already signed?
Well, some of them you'll recognize from his first term.
Okay.
Like he already pulled the U.S. out of the World Health Organization and the Paris Agreement again. And he also put a freeze on federal hiring and new regulations.
Oh, wow.
You know, signaling that he wants to shrink the government, essentially.
So it's like a repeat, but louder this time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Those are definitely attention-grabbing, but I'm guessing those aren't the ones that are causing the biggest stir. What else is he doing?
Well, there are a bunch of orders targeting what his administration is calling gender ideology and DEI initiatives.
DEI.
Yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that means rolling back recognition of transgender individuals, limiting the scope of DEI programs in the government, and making it way harder for federal agencies to even consider those things when making decisions.
Wow. Okay. So tapping into the culture wars right away. That was a big part of his first term. And hold on, I'm also seeing here that there was a mass pardon for the January 6th rioters.
Yeah, that's right. Almost 1,500 people who were involved in the Capitol attack got pardons. And it's been very controversial. A lot of people are saying this undermines the rule of law and that it sends this message that political violence is acceptable.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it definitely sends a message. And on top of all that, there's the National Emergency Declaration at the southern border. I'm even seeing reports that this could mean sending in the military.
Yeah. The military is actually making plans right now for possible deployment to the border.
Oh, wow.
Which, you know, brings up a lot of questions about using the military for immigration and if it could escalate things.
It's giving me major deja vu from his first term, but like amplified.
Yeah.
And this all ties into something we were talking about before we started recording, this whole idea of retribution. Like, remember how during the campaign, Trump was always talking about going after his enemies?
Oh, yeah.
Is that what we're seeing now with some of these actions?
That's a tough question. But there are definitely some things that seem targeted. Like, he started revoking security clearances from former government officials who criticized him during his first term or after the election, you know?
Right.
He even ordered them to take down General Milley's portrait at the Pentagon.
Wait, really? General Milley, the former Joint Chiefs chair?
Yep.
Wow. That's pretty pointed, wouldn't you say?
It's symbolic, but definitely a strong statement. And then there's that order for the Justice Department to investigate the Biden administration for, quote, weaponization.
Weaponization. Okay, what does that even mean in this context?
Basically, it's saying that the previous administration used the government's power for their own political gain, like targeting conservatives or suppressing their speech.
Okay.
Whether those claims are true is a whole other issue.
Right. So it's like saying the Democrats did what he's doing now.
You could definitely interpret it that way. And it feeds into this whole narrative that there's a deep state working against him, which is something he kept talking about in his first term and during the campaign.
Right, right. Okay, so it seems like a lot of score settling going on here. And to top it all off, I'm seeing here that he also fired several prosecutors who were working on cases against the January 6th rioters. That just seems typical of him.
Yeah, it fits the pattern, for sure. And it makes you wonder if he's trying to protect his supporters from facing consequences for their actions. This whole thing about using executive power to target opponents and reward loyalists, that's something to watch closely.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, there is a lot to unpack here, but before we move on, there is one more thing we had to talk about.
Yeah.
The creation of the Department of Government Efficiency, or, as everyone's calling it, DOGE, led by, of course, Elon Musk.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, the name itself is pretty interesting considering it's, the same as that DOGE meme coin.
Right. And coincidentally or not, that coin saw a huge jump in value right after the announcement.
How that? Okay. So the name is definitely a choice. But what's the supposed purpose of this department and why is everyone so freaked out about it?
Well, on the surface, they say it's about modernizing government technology, streamlining operations, cutting costs. It plays into this idea that the government's inefficient and bureaucratic and that Musk can come in and shake things up.
I mean, the government is inefficient thing. That's not new, right? We've been hearing that forever.
Exactly.
But having Musk in charge of fixing it, that's where it gets kind of scary, don't you think?
Yeah. It definitely raises some red flags. There are major concerns about conflicts of interest because of all of Musk's businesses and, let's be honest, his unpredictable personality.
Right. Okay. So break it down for us. What are people specifically worried about?
So, for one, Musk is filling DOGE with his own people, appointing his close associates to key roles in places like the Office of Personnel Management and the General Services Administration.
Right.
Those are the ones that handle things like hiring, contracts, procurement.
Oh, so he's got his hands in everything.
Yeah, he's got a lot of control. And then on top of that, DOGE was given access to the Treasury's payment system.
Whoa, wait a minute. Really? That sounds a little alarming, no?
Yeah, very unusual. Basically, it means they have control over trillions of dollars in federal funds.
Oh, my God.
They say it's necessary to streamline payments and cut waste, but a lot of people are worried about a lack of oversight and that this could lead to abuse.
Yeah, I'm not feeling super great about this either. And then what about the whole USAID thing? Can you remind everyone what happened there?
Right, so USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, they're the ones who handle foreign aid. Musk has always been very vocal about how much he hates foreign aid, saying it's wasteful and ineffective and all that. Then a few weeks ago, he tweeted that USAID was a criminal organization.
Whoa, okay.
And shortly after that, they basically shut down the agency.
Seriously, he tweeted that they were criminals and they just shut it down. Is that even legal?
Well, it definitely raises questions about due process, the role of social media in government, and whether Musk is overstepping his boundaries. And, this is exactly the kind of impulsive behavior that worries people.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't inspire confidence. This whole DOGE situation feels like we're seeing in real time how quickly norms can be eroded when you have someone like Musk in a position of power. And speaking of eroding norms, let's talk about the culture wars, because those are back in full swing. It's like Trump picked up right where he left off on things like abortion, LGBTQ plus rights, and religion.
Yeah, absolutely. All those hot-button social issues have been front and center already in his second term.
Okay, so like what?
Well, with abortion, he's said that he thinks it should be left up to the states.
Right.
But at the same time, he's also talked about maybe letting states criminalize women who have abortions.
Wait, hold on. So states' rights, but also letting them criminalize women seeking health care.
Yeah, it's a bit of a contradiction.
Yeah. What would even happen legally and ethically if that happened?
Oh, the consequences could be enormous. It could essentially become a nationwide ban on abortion, even in cases of rape or incest. And it would disproportionately affect low-income women and women of color who may not be able to travel to a state where it's legal.
Oh, wow. That's really scary.
It's a very concerning development, yeah.
And I'm seeing that he's been really active on LGBTQ plus issues too, right?
Yeah, he's issued several executive orders targeting transgender and LGBTQ plus people. Like, one of the biggest ones defines sex as strictly binary, male or female, which leaves out intersex people completely.
Oh, wow.
Medical and human rights groups are really condemning this.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty clear attempt to erase the existence of intersex people, which is harmful and scientifically wrong. What other orders has he issued?
He's rolled back protections for transgender students, meaning they can't use the bathrooms or locker rooms that match their gender identity. And he's banned gender-affirming care for minors.
Oh my God, so trans kids can't get the health care they need.
Right.
This all feels like a direct attack on trans people, especially trans youth, who are already incredibly vulnerable.
It's very disturbing. And all of these orders are facing legal challenges, but the impact on trans people's lives is already really bad.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. Okay, so we have the culture wars raging on, but what about the economy?
Right.
That was a big focus during Trump's campaign, and I know you've been looking into his economic policies. What's the plan there?
It seems like he's basically doubling down on what he did during his first term.
Okay.
He's going full steam ahead with his tariffs, putting higher taxes on imports from almost every country.
Oh, wow. But didn't we see during his first term that those often backfire? Don't they end up hurting American consumers and businesses more than anyone else?
That's the worry. There is a big chance of negative economic consequences. Higher prices for consumers, retaliatory tariffs from other countries, disruption to global trade. It's risky, especially since he inherited a relatively strong economy from Biden.
So why take the risk? What's the point of all this?
He's trying to frame it as a way to protect American jobs and industries from unfair competition. But critics are saying it's more about economic nationalism and wanting to punish the countries he sees as rivals.
Okay, so classic America First, which was his whole thing in his first term. But what about social programs? Are there any changes there?
Yeah, the Republicans now control both the House and Senate.
Right.
And they are pushing for big cuts to social programs like Medicare and Social Security.
Oh, wow.
They're saying these programs are unsustainable and need reform, but critics are saying this is an attack on the social safety net.
Right, and I'm guessing these cuts are supposed to make up for all those tax cuts, right?
Exactly. It's the same playbook.
Mhm.
Cut taxes for corporations and the wealthy and then say there's no money left for the social programs that everyone else relies on. It's a huge issue for economic inequality and shows what this administration's priorities are.
Right, right. It sounds like a lot of Trump's campaign promises are being put into action, for good or for bad. And speaking of promises, we actually have a section from a White House document here called The First 100 Hours, Historic Action to Kick Off America's Golden Age. It's all about the positive effects they say Trump's actions have already had.
Oh, interesting. Let's hear it.
Okay, here's one. President Trump secured $500 billion in private sector investment for the largest AI infrastructure project in history. Is that actually true?
Well, it's misleading. There has been some talk about public-private partnerships for AI infrastructure,
Okay.
but nothing has been officially announced, and it's definitely not a done deal.
So more like a possibility than an actual achievement. How about this one? The Border Patrol is reporting a significant drop already in attempted illegal crossings. Is that accurate?
So border crossings have gone down,
Yeah, okay.
but that trend actually started during the previous administration because of Biden's policies that restricted asylum. So it's not really right to claim it as a victory for Trump.
Got it. So more cherry-picking data to fit their story. Let's try one more. IC is at work, rounding up criminal aliens. Are they really arresting undocumented immigrants with criminal records as much as they're making it sound?
Well, the document cites a Fox News report
Okay.
that says ICE arrested over 460 undocumented immigrants with criminal records in just 33 hours.
Oh, wow.
But we haven't seen any independent verification of those numbers, and the report doesn't say what kind of crimes these people were even convicted of.
So we should probably take that one with a grain of salt. Okay. And then there's this line. President Donald Trump is unleashing American energy. What does that even mean?
Basically rolling back environmental regulations,
Okay.
opening up protected lands to drilling, and pushing for continued use of fossil fuel.
So good for the oil and gas industry, maybe not so good for the planet.
Yeah, that's a big concern. I think it's important for people to look beyond the spin and read between the lines. This document is trying to make Trump's actions look good, but the reality is a lot more complicated.
It's a lot to take in. Executive orders, culture wars, a new government department that's raising a lot of eyebrows, and some creative interpretations of reality coming from the White House. But there is one more thing we have to discuss before we wrap up this part. Conflicts of interest. And let's be honest, there is so much to work with here.
That's an understatement. The potential for conflicts of interest in Trump's second term are unlike anything we've ever seen in American history.
It's a lot, honestly. Where do we even begin? Let's start with the most obvious one. The Trump meme coin.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the president having his own cryptocurrency.
It's pretty wild.
Even for him, this is next level.
Definitely raises eyebrows, especially because it might be breaking the Constitution's emoluments clause.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't constitutional law experts, can you explain what that is and why it matters here?
Okay, so basically the emoluments clause says that federal officials, including the president, can't accept gifts or payments from foreign governments or monarchs without Congress's approval. It's supposed to stop corruption and make sure that the president is loyal to the American people, not foreign powers.
So how does a meme coin relate to that? It's not like some king is giving Trump a bag of gold, right?
Right. It's a little trickier. The concern is that foreign governments or people connected to them could buy tons of Trump coin to try to get on the president's good side
Oh, I see.
or to influence his decisions. It's kind of like a sneaky form of bribery.
So like, hey, Mr. President, I just put millions of dollars into your meme coin. Maybe you could reconsider those sanctions on my country.
Exactly. And the fact that the Trump coin is now worth billions of dollars just hours after it launched makes things even worse. I mean, the potential for profit is huge, and it's really hard to separate Trump's personal finances from his job as president.
Right. Okay, so that's a big red flag. But that's not the only money problem here, right? He still hasn't sold off his businesses, even though he promised he would during his first campaign.
Nope, still owns the Trump Organization, which does business all over the world. And even though people have asked him to set up a blind trust, he hasn't done it.
So he's making money from his businesses while also making decisions that could affect those same businesses.
Exactly.
That's like the definition of a conflict of interest. And then it gets even more complicated when you factor in his family. I mean, his son, Eric Trump, has said publicly that the Trump Organization is going to keep making deals overseas.
Wow.
They're not even hiding it.
That creates a situation where foreign governments could use those business deals to try and get close to the president or influence his policies.
Yeah, it feels like a recipe for corruption and a loss of trust from the public.
For sure.
And it's not just Trump himself. We were talking before about how some of his cabinet picks have like dozens, maybe even hundreds of potential conflicts of interest. How is that even possible?
A lot of his appointees come from industries that are directly impacted by government regulation,
Yeah.
like former oil executives, Wall Street people, real estate developers. They could personally benefit from the decisions they're making in government.
Wow.
The Campaign Legal Center has pointed out a lot of these potential conflicts, which means a lot of these appointees are going to have to recuse themselves from certain decisions to avoid even looking like they're doing something wrong.
It's like this revolving door between industry and government, and I don't see how that helps the public at all. It's not a good look. It's a president with his own meme coin, a government department run by a tech billionaire who loves Twitter a little too much, executive orders that target certain groups of people, and potential conflicts of interest everywhere you look. It's like a reality TV show gone wrong, but the consequences are really serious this time.
Yeah, it's a tough time for democracy in America. We're seeing norms and institutions being eroded, and no one really knows what's going to happen in the long run.
So what can we do? What does this mean for us as citizens? How do we even begin to deal with this?
That's the question we all need to be asking. The second term is unlike anything we've ever seen. So how can citizens hold the people in power accountable and actually have a say in where the country goes from here?
It can feel really overwhelming, like where do you even start? But I think the first step is just staying informed. We have to know what's going on, understand the issues, and be really careful about what information we trust.
Definitely. Don't just get your news from one place. Find different perspectives, fact check everything, and be willing to question your own assumptions.
And we have to do more than just stay informed. We have to participate in democracy. That means voting in every election, contacting our representatives, supporting organizations that share our values, and making our voices heard.
Absolutely. Democracy isn't something you just watch, you have to be a part of it. And even though it feels like things are out of control, we can't lose hope. We have to believe that what we do matters and that we can build a better future for our country.
That's a great point. Okay, folks, that wraps up our look at the beginning of Trump's second term. It's been a wild ride, and I'm sure there's more to come. But hopefully this has given you something to think about and maybe even inspired you to get a little more involved in creating the future you want to see. Remember, stay informed, stay involved, and most importantly, stay hopeful. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something else. Until then, thanks for listening.
They say it's about, modernizing government technology, streamlining operations, cutting costs. That whole thing about the government being inefficient and bureaucratic, and
Right.
that someone like Musk can come in and, disrupt things.
Right, but that whole government is inefficient thing, that's not new, right? Like, we've been hearing that forever.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But Musk in charge of fixing it, that's where I get a little nervous.
Yeah, definitely. It raises a lot of red flags. There are big concerns about conflicts of interest,
Right.
with all of Musk's businesses and his personality, which, let's be honest, can be unpredictable.
Right. Okay, so what are people specifically worried about?
Well, for one thing, Musk has been stacking DOGE with his own people, appointing close associates to important positions in places like the Office of Personnel Management and the General Services Administration.
Yeah.
Those are the ones who handle, like, hiring, contracts, all of that.
So he's controlling everything.
Yeah, he's got a lot of control. And then on top of that, DOGE was given access to the Treasury's payment system.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit scary now.
Yeah, it's very unusual. Basically, it means they control trillions of dollars in federal funds.
Oh my God.
And they're saying that it's necessary to streamline payments and cut waste, but a lot of people are worried about a lack of oversight and the potential for abuse.
Yeah, I don't feel great about it either.
Right.
And then what about that whole USAID thing? Can you remind everyone what happened?
Right. So USAA, the U.S. Agency for International Development, they're the ones who do foreign aid.
Right.
And, Musk has always been very vocal about hating foreign aid, saying it's wasteful and ineffective.
Right.
And then a few weeks ago, he tweeted that USAID was a criminal organization.
Oh.
And shortly after that, they basically shut down the agency.
He just tweeted they were criminals and they shut it down. Is that even legal?
Well, it definitely raises questions about due process.
Yeah.
The role of social media in government
Mm-hmm.
and whether Musk is overstepping his boundaries. And this is exactly the kind of impulsive behavior that worries people.
It definitely doesn't make me feel confident. This
Yeah.
whole DOGE situation feels like we're watching how quickly things can change, how quickly those norms can be eroded when you have someone like Musk in a position of power.
And speaking of eroding norms, let's talk about the culture wars. They seem to be back in full swing. It's like Trump picked up right where he left off
Oh, yeah.
on things like abortion, LGBTQ plus rights, and religion.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those controversial social issues have been front and center right from the start of his second term.
So, like, what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, with abortion, he said he thinks it should be up to each state.
But at the same time, he's also talked about maybe letting states make it a crime for women to have abortions.
Wait, hold on. So states' rights, but also letting them criminalize women seeking health care.
Yeah, it's a bit of a contradiction.
What would even happen legally and ethically if that happened?
It could be huge. It could essentially become a nationwide ban on abortion,
Wow.
even in cases of rape or incest. And it would really impact low-income women and women of color who might not be able to go to a state where it's legal.
That's terrifying.
It's a really concerning development, for sure.
And I'm also seeing he's been very active on LGBTQ plus issues as well, right?
Yeah, he's issued several executive orders that target transgender and LGBTQ plus people. Like, one of the most significant ones defines sex as strictly binary, male or female, which completely ignores intersex people.
Wow.
Medical and human rights groups have condemned this.
It feels like a deliberate attempt to pretend intersex people don't exist, which is not only harmful, but also just scientifically inaccurate. What else
Yeah.
has he done?
Well, he's rolled back those protections for transgender students, meaning they're no longer allowed to use bathrooms or locker rooms that match their gender identity. And there's a ban on gender-affirming care for minors, too.
So trans kids can't get the medical care they need.
Right.
This all just feels like an attack on trans people, especially trans kids who are already so vulnerable.
It's really disturbing. And all of these orders are facing legal challenges, but the impact on trans people's lives is already really bad.
That's just heartbreaking. Okay, so we had the culture wars happening, but what about the economy?
Right.
It's a big focus during the campaign. I know you've been digging into his economic policies. What's the plan there?
Well, it seems like he's doubling down on what he did in his first term. He's
Okay.
really pushing those tariffs, putting higher taxes on imports from almost every country.
But didn't we see during his first term that those usually backfire? And that they actually hurt American consumers and businesses more than anyone?
That's what a lot of people are worried about. There's a real chance of negative economic consequences. Higher prices for consumers, other countries putting their own tariffs on us in return, disruption to global trade. It's risky, especially since he inherited a relatively strong economy from Biden.
So why take that risk? What's the logic here?
He's framing it as a way to protect American jobs and industries from what he calls unfair competition.
Okay.
But critics are saying it's more about economic nationalism and wanting to punish the countries he doesn't like.
Right. Classic America first, like we saw in his first term. What about social programs? Any changes there?
Well, now the Republicans control both the House and the Senate,
Right.
and they're pushing for big cuts to programs like Medicare and Social Security.
Oh, wow.
They say these programs are unsustainable and need to be reformed, but critics are calling it an attack on the social safety net.
And I'm guessing those cuts are supposed to pay for all the tax cuts, right?
Exactly. It's the same old story. Cut taxes for the wealthy and corporations, and then claim there's not enough money for social programs that everyone else relies on. It's a huge problem for economic inequality and really shows this administration's priorities.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of Trump's campaign promises are actually being put into action, for better or worse. Speaking of promises, we actually have a section here from a White House document called The First 100 Hours, Historic Action to Kick Off America's Golden Age.
Oh, wow.
And it's all about the positive things they say Trump's actions have already done.
Interesting. Let's hear it.
Okay, so here's one. President Trump secured $500 billion in private sector investment for the largest AI infrastructure project in history. Is that even true?
It's a bit misleading. While there has been talk about public-private partnerships for AI infrastructure,
Right.
nothing's been officially announced. It's definitely not a done deal yet.
So more like a maybe than an actual accomplishment.
Mm.
How about this one? The Border Patrol is reporting a significant drop already in attempted illegal crossings. Is that accurate?
So border crossings have gone down.
Okay.
But that trend actually started during the Biden administration, largely because of Biden's policies that made it harder to seek asylum. So it's not really fair to say that this is because of Trump.
Got it. So again, they're choosing data to fit their narrative.
Okay.
Let's try another one. ICE is at work rounding up criminal aliens. Are they really arresting as many undocumented immigrants with criminal records as they're making it seem?
So the document cites a Fox News report
Okay.
saying that ICE arrested over 460 undocumented immigrants with criminal records in just 33 hours.
Wow.
But there's no proof to back up those numbers, and the report doesn't say what kind of crimes these people were convicted of.
So take it with a grain of salt.
Okay.
And lastly, there's this line. President Donald Trump is unleashing American energy. What does that even mean?
Basically, it means rolling back environmental regulations,
Okay.
opening up protected lands for drilling, and promoting the continued use of fossil fuels.
So good for the oil and gas industry, but maybe not for the planet.
That's a big concern. It's really important for people to be able to see through the spin and look at what's really going on. This document is trying to make Trump's actions look good, but the reality is a lot more complicated.
It's a lot to take in. We've got executive orders, culture wars, this new government department that's raising a lot of questions, and some interesting interpretations of reality coming from the White House. But there's one more thing we have to talk about before we wrap things up. Conflicts of interest.
Right.
And let's be real, there is no shortage of material here.
That's an understatement. The potential conflicts of interest with Trump in his second term are unlike anything we've ever seen.
It's honestly overwhelming. Where do we even begin?
Yeah.
I guess we can start with the most obvious one, the Trump meme coin.
Oh, yeah.
A sitting president with his own cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
That's a new one. Hey. Even for Trump, this is next level.
It's wild. It definitely raises some eyebrows, especially because it could be breaking the Constitution's emoluments clause.
Okay, so for those of us who didn't go to law school, can you explain what that means and why it's important here?
It basically means that federal officials, like the president, can't accept gifts or payments from foreign governments or, like, royalty without Congress saying it's okay.
Okay.
The idea is to prevent corruption,
Yeah.
And to make sure that the president is loyal to the American people and not to some foreign power.
So how does a meme coin fit into all of this? It's not like a king is giving Trump a chest full of gold.
Right. It's a little more complicated than that. The worry is that foreign governments, or even just people connected to them, could buy a lot of this Trump coin as a way to, I don't know, get in good with the president
Right.
or to try and influence his decisions. It's like a sneaky way to bribe someone.
Oh, so it's like, hey, Mr. President,
Mm.
I just invested millions of dollars in your meme coin. Maybe you could think about lifting those sanctions on my country.
Exactly. And the fact that the Trump coin is now worth billions of dollars, and this happened just hours after it launched, really makes people even more worried. The potential for profit is huge, and it's really hard to tell where Trump's personal finances end and his role as president begins.
Right. Okay, so the meme coin is a big red flag. But that's not the only financial issue we should be thinking about, right? He never got rid of his businesses, even though he promised he would back during his first campaign.
Nope. He still owns the Trump Organization,
Wow.
which does business all over the world. And even though people have been asking him to set up a blind trust, he just hasn't done it.
So he's making money from his businesses while at the same time making decisions that could affect those businesses.
Exactly. It's a conflict of interest. And then it gets even trickier when you bring his family into it. His son, Eric Trump, has actually said publicly that the Trump Organization is going to keep doing business deals overseas.
Wow. So they're not even trying to hide it.
Nope. And that means foreign governments could use those business deals to try and get close to the president or to influence his policies. It's basically asking for corruption, and it definitely erodes public trust.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it's not just Trump himself. Remember how we talked about how some of his cabinet picks have like dozens, maybe even hundreds, of potential conflicts of interest each? How is that even possible?
Well, a lot of his appointees come from those industries that are directly affected by government regulations. We're talking about people like former oil executives, Wall Street folks, real estate developers,
Right.
the kind of people who could personally profit from the decisions they're making now that they're in government. The Campaign Legal Center has identified so many potential conflicts that a lot of these people are going to have to recuse themselves from certain decisions just to avoid looking like they're doing something shady.
So it's like this revolving door between industry and government. And it doesn't seem like that's good for the average person. It's not a good look. So we've got a president with his own meme coin, a government department run by a tech billionaire who's obsessed with Twitter, executive orders targeting specific groups of people, and potential conflicts of interest everywhere. It's almost like some kind of messed up reality TV show, but this time the stakes are incredibly high.
It's definitely a tough time for American democracy. It seems like we're watching these norms and institutions just crumble. And it's hard to say what the long-term consequences will be.
So what can we even do? I mean, what does all this mean for everyday people? How do we deal with all of this?
That's a big question, isn't it? This second term is like nothing we've ever seen. So how can people hold the people in power accountable and actually have a say in what happens to this country?
I know. It's really overwhelming. It's like, where do you even start? But I think the most important thing is just to stay informed. We need to know what's going on, understand the issues, and be really careful about the information we believe.
Absolutely. And don't just rely on one source. Look for different viewpoints, fact-check everything, and be willing to question your own assumptions.
And we have to do more than just stay informed. We have to get involved. Vote in every election, contact your representatives, support organizations that align with your values, and speak up.
Exactly. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to be an active participant. And even though it might feel like things are falling apart, we can't give up. We have to believe that what we do makes a difference and that we can make this country better.
That's a really good point. Okay, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the start of Trump's second term. It's been a wild ride, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come. But hopefully this has given you something to think about and maybe even inspired you to get involved in creating the future you want to see. Remember, stay informed, stay active, and most importantly, stay hopeful. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something else. Until then, thanks for listening.